What if I told you that Egypt wasn't the first great civilization in Africa? What if what you've been taught about the origins of humanity is only a carefully chosen part of a much larger and deeper story? There's an entire chapter of true African history that has been hidden, erased, or ignored for centuries. A chapter that begins with a powerful, spiritual, structured, and ancestral kingdom, the Kingdom of Kush. The truth about the African kingdom that ruled before Egypt has been hidden for centuries. We are not talking about a small, forgotten tribe in the desert. We are talking about a magnificent civilization, older than the Egyptian pharaohs, that dominated vast territories south of the Nile, built its own pyramids, developed its own writing, its faith, and its dynasties, and which, for a significant period, ruled Egypt itself. But why does almost no one talk about this? Why does the world know the pyramids of Giza, but ignore the Black Pyramids of Meroë? Why are Egyptian pharaohs glorified in films, books, and museums, but the kings of Kush are silenced in school curricula? There is something unsettling about this story, something that could change our view of the origins of power, faith, and royalty on the African continent. Get ready, because what you're about to discover in this video could completely change your perception of ancient African history. We're not just here to review historical facts. We're here to unearth a forgotten truth, a truth that involves not only culture and royalty, but also the Bible, spirituality, and the origins of Black peoples. Did you know that the name Kush appears several times in the Holy Scriptures? That there are prophecies linked to this African people, direct descendants of Ham, son of Noah? That in the Bible, the Kushites are mentioned as valiant warriors, powerful peoples, and even instruments of God himself? So it is. The Kingdom of Kush is not just history, it's identity. It is an essential part of the African lineage, a Black empire that predates Egypt and was strategically erased so that Africa would not be recognized as the cradle of powerful, spiritual, and civilized kingdoms. Throughout this video, we will travel through time. Let's explore the roots of this empire, its kings, its queens, such as the famous Candaces, women who commanded armies, its temples, its gods, and its connection to the spiritual world. Let's understand how Egypt was influenced by Kush and why this has been hidden from the traditional narrative. And before you think this is just historical curiosity, know this. Recognizing the true history of Kush is an act of spiritual, cultural, and identity reconnection. It is giving voice to a people who, despite the imposed silence, left clear signs of their greatness. Signs that are found in the stones, in ancient texts, and even in the Holy Scriptures. Are you ready to hear a story that could change everything you believed about the origins of African civilization? So stay with me, because now we're going to delve into the origins of the Kingdom of Kush, and to discover why it was erased, and what that reveals about the spiritual and historical truth that many still want to hide, and to discover why it was erased, and what that reveals about the spiritual and historical truth that many still want to hide. But before we continue this deep journey through the Kingdom of Kush, I want to ask you something important. If this content has resonated with you in any way, please leave a like now. It shows YouTube that this kind of truth needs to reach more people. Comment below what you knew, or what you were never told, about the history of Africa before Egypt. Your participation enriches this discussion and strengthens this community that is seeking transformative revelations. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because we're going to continue uncovering hidden truths, biblical mysteries, and revelations that have been silenced for centuries. Let's work together to give voice to the true story. Now then, let's go back to the beginning, because to understand Kush, we first need to understand where it all began. To truly understand the Kingdom of Kush, we need to go back in time, really back. Long before the pharaohs ascended the throne in Egypt, before the pyramids that the whole world idolizes, even before hieroglyphic writing flourished on the banks of the Nile. We are talking about an ancient African civilization, rich, spiritual, and strategically positioned in the region known as Nubia, south of Egypt, in what is now called Sudan. This fertile and mysterious land was crossed by one of the most important stretches of the Nile River. But what almost no one mentions is that it was precisely there, and not in Egypt, that one of the first and most powerful civilizations of humanity flourished, the Kingdom of Kush. For a long time, this region was seen only as an extension of Egypt, a mistake that was fueled by centuries of historical colonialism, where the true importance of this land was deliberately erased from the history books. The Kushite civilization didn't emerge from nowhere. It has deep ancestral roots, connected not only to Egypt, but to the most mysterious aspects of biblical and spiritual narratives. The name Kush, or Kush, appears in the very first chapters of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, as one of the sons of Ham, who in turn was the son of Noah. In other words, the lineage of Kush is pre-Egyptian, antediluvian, spiritual, and powerful. Have you ever stopped to think about that? An African kingdom was already mentioned in the scriptures even before Egypt became the Egypt we know today. That changes everything. And more than that, the territory that Kush occupied, now called Sudan, was rich in gold, ebony, ivory, and precious stones, resources that made this civilization one of the most coveted in antiquity. In fact, the Egyptians at many times both feared and revered Kushite power. This is not theory. It is recorded in paintings, stelae, and texts that the Egyptians themselves left behind. But why was this erased? Why do Western schools talk about Rome, Greece, Egypt, but not about Kush? The answer, unfortunately, lies in the painful recognition that the history of Africa has been erased because it carries a glory that bothers many people. And it's not just any glory, it's a real, ancestral, divine glory. The Kushites not only had kings, they had black pharaohs, crowned with the same prestige as the Egyptians, but with an even stronger connection to the spiritual roots of humanity. Many scholars even believe that the concept of royal divinity, so prominent in Egypt, was directly inherited from Kush. They built monumental temples, left inscriptions in their own script, Meroitic script, and erected pyramids, yes, pyramids, that still stand today in the Nubian desert. By the way, did you know that there are more pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt? That's right, but they are ignored by most history books. Tourists go to Cairo, but don't visit Meroë. The media shows Tutankhamun, but not the kings and queens of Napata. It's as if there's a curtain hiding this evidence, a deliberate curtain, made to keep the focus always on the same place, always on the same narrative. And meanwhile, the Kushite people, who directly influenced Egyptian culture, architecture, and even religion, remain forgotten in the sands of time. But here, in this video, we're doing things differently. We're lifting the curtain and bringing to light what has been silenced. And you know what's most impressive? The Egyptians themselves recorded the Kushite presence in their lands. Yes, Egypt was once ruled by an entire Kushite dynasty, the 25th dynasty, known as the Black Pharaohs. These kings, originally from Napata, in the heart of Kush, took the Egyptian throne and restored spiritual traditions that were being forgotten. They reunified Upper and Lower Egypt. They were seen as restorers of divine order. The presence of Kush is also found in religious texts. Isaiah, for example, mentions Kush as a nation of tall men with shining skin. In Zephaniah, God declares that the people of Kush will also be called to worship. At various points, the Bible speaks of Kush as a powerful, feared nation, even used as a reference to God's strength. Now think about this. If this nation was so strong, so spiritually relevant, why is it no longer remembered? Why don't believers today talk about it? Why don't modern scholars study it as they should? Kush was more than a political kingdom. It was a spiritual symbol of Black Africa. It was a civilization that resisted the imposition of empires, preserved its traditions, influenced Egypt, and left marks still visible today in archaeology and scripture. And all this happened there, in that stretch of the Nile River that few know today, but which was, for millennia, the beating heart of a glorious Black empire. And at this moment, perhaps you are beginning to understand why this history has been erased. Because when you acknowledge Kush, you begin to acknowledge Africa as a whole, not just as the colonized continent, but as the cradle of divine kingdoms, spiritual leaders, warrior queens, and ancestral wisdom. This changes the game. It changes how you look at yourself. It changes how the world looks at Black spirituality. And that is why, my friend, it is so important that we talk about this, that we share this, that we break this silence. Now tell me in the comments, had you ever heard of the Kingdom of Kush? Do you believe that Egypt was really the first? Or is this new perspective opening something up inside you? Tell me below. Write something like, "Now I see Kush." That will show you're here with me on this journey. You realize that the deeper we delve, the clearer it becomes that the story has been told only halfway, or worse, told with the intention of hiding something. And now, the time has come to understand the deeper roots of the Kingdom of Kush, diving into what few dare to explore, the true origin of this African empire, an origin predating Egypt, predating the official records of traditional history, an origin directly connected to the spiritual lineage of humanity. In the Bible, in the book of Genesis, a name appears that, for many, goes unnoticed. But this name carries a gigantic ancestral power: Kush. He was the son of Ham, and Ham was one of Noah's 3 sons. That is, the Kushite lineage is one of the first post-Diluvian lineages mentioned in the scriptures. And Kush was not just a name mentioned. He was the father of peoples, the founder of nations, the direct ancestor of one of the most enigmatic and spiritually powerful kingdoms in history, the Kingdom of Kush. According to biblical tradition, the sons of Ham were those who settled in the region of Africa and the Middle East. And Kush specifically was the one whose descendants occupied the region of Nubia in present-day Sudan, giving rise to a lineage marked by royalty, wisdom, spirituality, and power. It is important to note that this is not merely an ethnic or geographical lineage. It is a spiritual, symbolic lineage with prophetic weight, as several biblical texts mention Kush as a people who would be remembered, exalted, and used by God in His greater plan. Now, if we move away from the biblical text and delve into the rich African oral tradition, passed down through generations for centuries, we see that the stories about the ancestors of Kush are preserved with reverence. Tribes and peoples descended from the ancient Kushites tell of kings who came from the heavens, of priests who mastered the secrets of creation, of cities of gold lost in time, of lineages that came before time. And most surprisingly, many of these accounts fit with archaeological records that have only recently been discovered, reinforcing the idea that ancestral African wisdom has always known the truth that the modern world has tried to erase. Excavations in Kerma, Napata, and Meroë reveal layers of civilization dating back thousands of years before the consolidation of Egypt as an empire. These are complex structures: royal tombs, pyramids, sacred artifacts, bronze weapons, gold ornaments, all pointing to a society that was already structured, organized, and with a profoundly spiritual worldview. They were not only concerned with the physical world, they believed in an interconnected spiritual world where kings were also priests, and where political decisions were made based on spiritual revelations. The Nile Valley, which would later be dominated by pharaonic Egypt, was already influenced by Kush long before the Egyptians erected their temples. In fact, some forms of worship, such as the cult of Amun, which would later become central to Egypt, already appeared among the Kushites in an even deeper and more original way. This shows that Egyptian spirituality may have been inspired by, adapted from, or even copied from Kushite practices. In other words, perhaps what we call Egyptian wisdom is actually an extension of Kushite wisdom, earlier and more connected to its origin. And once again, we have to ask ourselves, why isn't this information celebrated? Why do so many ignore the fact that the Kushite lineage, descended from Ham, was the foundation of the first organized African civilization even before Egypt? Perhaps because admitting this would change all the pride built around the traditional narrative, because it would place Black Africa in a prominent position of origin, of spiritual sovereignty, because it would exalt a black and divine lineage that doesn't depend on European approval to exist. And let's remember, Kush begat Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, mentioned as the founder of Babel and kingdoms like Nineveh. This shows that the descendants of Kush were fundamental in the formation of the great powers of antiquity, both in Africa and in the East. And yet, the name Kush has been erased from conversations about ancient civilizations. But not here. Here, we bring this truth to light. The influence of Kush spread down the Nile like a river of silent power. They sailed, traded, and dominated. They taught. Through commerce, diplomacy, and faith, the Kushites left their mark from Nubia to the Egyptian delta and beyond. Their ships reached places other civilizations didn't even know how to navigate. Their symbols were found in remote locations, proving they weren't isolated. They were connected. They were central. All of this leads us to understand that the Kingdom of Kush was not simply a neighboring civilization of Egypt. It was an ancient empire, that gave rise to structures of power and faith that the world is still trying to decipher. An empire that challenged the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural, the visible and the invisible. An empire born from a lineage marked in the Bible and confirmed by archaeology, but which the modern system has tried to erase from collective memory. Can you see now why all of this is so important? Why reclaiming the history of Kush is more than just an academic exercise? It's an act of spiritual resistance. It's a call to restore what has been lost, to reconnect the African people to their true heritage, not through the pain of slavery, but through the glory of ancestry. And that's what we're doing here together, revealing, reconnecting, awakening. And now that you know where it all began, tell me in the comments, do you believe that the Kushite lineage carries a spiritual purpose that still resonates today? Right. I am descended from royalty if this truth moved you. Now that we understand who Kush was and how his lineage gave rise to the powerful Kingdom of Kush, we need to address a delicate, yet absolutely necessary question. Why was this history hidden? Why did such a rich, spiritually profound civilization, with such an evident legacy in both archaeology and scripture, simply disappear from textbooks, major historical productions, and collective memory? The answer is not simple, but it begins with a troubling fact. The history of Africa has been told, for centuries, by people who were not African, and more than that, by people who had a very clear interest in diminishing, distorting, and silencing the grandeur of black civilization. What we see is the reflection of a system that, over the centuries, has constructed a historical narrative marked by Eurocentrism, archaeological racism, and cultural supremacy. What does this mean in practice? It means that for a long time, and even today in many places, only that which could be connected to the European model of organization, art, and writing was considered civilization. If it didn't have Greek columns, Roman statues, or Christian cathedrals, it wasn't considered progress. And so, in the eyes of these historians, the Kingdom of Kush was never treated as a worthy empire. They ignored its pyramids, belittled its Meroitic script, and treated the biblical records about Kush as mere footnotes. And the cruelest part, when they couldn't erase it, they distorted it. When the Kushites assumed the throne of Egypt during the 25th dynasty, for example, the records were manipulated. Instead of being described as spiritual restorers, they were called southern invaders, foreigners who had usurped the Egyptian throne. But the truth is that the Kushites were part of the same blood, the same land, the same Nile. They didn't invade, they returned. And they returned with spiritual strength, with leadership, with reverence for the gods, with the intention of restoring the Egyptian cosmic order, which the local pharaohs themselves had corrupted. It's important for you to understand that this type of manipulation didn't only happen in ancient texts. It repeats itself today in universities, documentaries, and museums. How many times have you seen a National Geographic documentary praising Kush? How many times has the name Kush been mentioned in your history books with the same prominence given to Rome, Greece, or Egypt itself? Probably none. And that's no coincidence. Archaeological racism is exactly that. It's when findings that don't confirm the dominant narrative are devalued, ignored, or conveniently interpreted. Several African archaeologists over the past few decades have been discredited simply for daring to say that black people founded ancient civilizations with culture, religion, architecture, and science. Meanwhile, many European researchers have received awards and recognition for discovering what African peoples have always known. And that's where an even deeper point comes in, one that needs to be stated clearly. The story wasn't just told incorrectly, it was systematically constructed to prevent black people from recognizing their true origins and spiritual power. Because when a people knows its roots, it becomes stronger. It connects with something greater. It discovers that it is much more than it has been taught to believe. And this awakening for the system is dangerous. Imagine the impact if black children around the world learned from an early age that an empire like Kush existed, that they descended from kings, priests, astronomers, builders, warriors, and visionaries, that the name of their origin is in the scriptures, that their history did not begin with slavery, but with royalty. This would change everything. It would change self-esteem. It would change their sense of mission. It would change the course of education, culture, and spirituality. Therefore, Hiding the truth about the Kingdom of Kush was not just an oversight, it was a plan, a project of erasure, of rewriting, of colonization not only of the land, but also of memory. And the most perverse thing is that, often, Egyptian historiography itself was used as an instrument of this distortion. We cannot forget that Egypt, due to its location and its fame in the West, was used as an African showcase, but a carefully made-up showcase. In the later Egyptian dynasties, already under Greek and Roman influence, records about earlier periods, such as the 25th Kushite dynasty, began to disappear, be minimized, or reinterpreted. It wasn't the original pharaonic Egypt that erased Kush. It was those who came after, those who took Egypt for themselves, those who appropriated Egyptian glory and disconnected it from its Nubian origins. And this cultural break was so profound that many today don't know that the very name Black Pharaoh was coined much later, and even then used pejoratively, as if the presence of black kings in Egypt were something out of the ordinary. But it wasn't. It was the rule. The Nile Valley has always been black, spiritual, connected to the land, to the stars, and to the divine. And Kush was the heart of that reality. To deny that is to deny the very essence of Africa. So, if we want to restore this history, we need to do more than just recount the facts. We need to expose the conflict of narratives, to show that there are layers of lies that were constructed to protect a structure, and that now, through knowledge, spirituality, and historical awareness, we can break down this structure. We can rewrite history, not to invent something new, but to recover what was stolen. And everything we're talking about here isn't just about the past, it's about now, about you, about what you're going to do with this information. Because if you've made it this far, it's because this truth called to you. Because something inside you recognizes that the time has come to reconnect with what is rightfully yours. And if this video is awakening something within you, comment below. I see what they tried to hide. I want to know if this message is reaching hearts that were ready to awaken. Now that you understand how the Kingdom of Kush was erased from official narratives, and how archaeological racism and Eurocentrism contributed to this erasure, it's time to explore an even deeper dimension of this story, the spiritual dimension. And for that, we will open the Bible itself. Because contrary to what many think, the people of Kush are present in the Holy Scriptures, and not in a marginal or secondary way. Quite the opposite. Kush, as it appears in various translations, is mentioned from the beginning of the biblical narrative, and always carrying with it a strong, spiritual, and even prophetic identity. Let's start at the beginning. In the book of Genesis, when nations are being formed after the flood, the text says that Kush was one of the sons of Ham, and that his descendants populated strategic regions of the earth. Kush fathered Nimrod, who became known as the first mighty man on earth, a valiant hunter, founder of cities and empires. This in itself shows that the Kushite lineage has a direct relationship with royalty, leadership, and the founding of power structures. In other words, the blood of Kush runs in the veins of empires. This is there, in your Bible, and it has been ignored for a long time. But the references don't stop there. In Genesis chapter 2, when Eden is still being described, the text speaks of 4 rivers flowing from the garden. One of them, called Gihon, encircles the entire land of Kush. Now stop and think with me. This means that, even before humanity fell, before sin, before the flood, the name Kush was already mentioned in a context linked to paradise, to God's original plan. Do you have any idea of the spiritual power this carries? The land of Kush is linked to Eden. It's not an exaggeration. It is written. And as if this connection to the origins of the world weren't enough, the name Kush continues to appear at crucial moments in the Bible. In Isaiah 18, for example, there is a direct prophecy about this people. The text speaks of a land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, Kush, a nation of tall men with shining skin, feared near and far, whose land the rivers cut through. And then, the Lord says that this people will bring offerings to Mount Zion. Do you know what this means? That Kush, the black African people descended from Ham, are part of God's restoration plan. They are a people whom God calls, whom God sends, whom God honors. In Zephaniah 3:10, another powerful prophecy is revealed. From beyond the rivers of Kush, my worshippers, the people of my dispersed people, will bring me offerings. This passage is even clearer. It speaks of a dispersed people, a people who were scattered, but who will still be gathered, restored, and will return to worship the Creator. Isn't that awe-inspiring? Because if you understand the African diaspora, if you understand the history of suffering, slavery, and dispersion of Black people throughout the centuries, you realize that this prophecy speaks directly to us, to the spiritual descendants of Kush, scattered throughout the world but called back to worship. Kush, therefore, is not just a name lost in antiquity. It is a symbol of strength, royalty, and spiritual wealth. It is a forgotten identity that is being restored in our time. And the most interesting thing is that every time Kush appears in the Bible, it is mentioned with respect, reverence, and spiritual weight. Even when other nations are criticized or destroyed, Kush always appears as powerful, strategic, and in many cases, as an ally of God's plan. We need to understand what this represents, because for centuries, Black people were taught that they weren't in the Bible, that the story of salvation was European, white, distant. But no, the Bible is a book deeply connected to Africa. From Eden to Revelation, the African presence is there. And Kush is one of the main gateways to this reconnection. And why was this hidden for so long? Because knowing this activates something within the soul. Knowing that your people are in the scriptures, that your history is part of the divine plan, changes everything. It changes the way you pray. It changes the way you look in the mirror. It changes the way you position yourself in the spiritual world. And perhaps that is precisely why this truth was silenced for so long. Because it empowers, it awakens, it rebuilds. It is also important to remember that the ancient writers of the Bible were not speaking of Africa as a distant continent. They lived there. Israel, Egypt, Ethiopia, Sudan, Mesopotamia, all of this was part of the same geographical, spiritual, and cultural reality. In other words, when Isaiah speaks of Kush, he is not referring to an unknown people. He is speaking of a present, known, powerful nation. A nation that, even though it was African and Black, was recognized as worthy of being mentioned in the prophecies. And if all this still isn't enough to make you rethink how you've always looked at the Bible, I want you to reflect with me for another moment. If the land of Kush is linked to Eden, if the people of Kush are linked to royalty and the founding of empires, if the prophecies indicate that it will be restored and will bring offerings to the Lord, why was this story taken from us? Why were we taught that the Bible was European, that Black spirituality was pagan, that African people had no place in God's plan? Enough. Enough of accepting distorted narratives. Enough of colonized spirituality. Enough of studying the Bible through the eyes of those who enslaved us. Now is the time to read with our own eyes, with our own spirit, with our own history. It is time to recognize that the people of Kush are alive and are awakening. If this touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Write, I am part of Zephaniah's prophecy, or I recognize Kush in the Bible. This is not just a comment, it's a spiritual declaration. You've noticed that the Bible already points, clearly and powerfully, to the presence of the Kushite people in the spiritual narrative of humanity. But now I want to take you down another path, a path that goes beyond faith and enters the field of science, archaeology, and irrefutable physical evidence. Because no matter how much they have tried to erase it, the soil of Africa still screams the truth with stones, inscriptions, tombs, temples, and pyramids. And once you see what's there, there's no way to unsee it. Let's start with something many people don't know. There are more pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt. Yes, you heard right. And it's not a conspiracy theory, it's not an exaggeration. It's a fact that is unsettling because it dismantles the idea that Egypt was the only major architectural center on the continent. In regions like Meroë, Napata, and Kerma, dozens and dozens of pyramids are scattered across the desert. Small, yes, compared to those of Giza, but no less symbolic, less important, or less spiritual. These structures are now called Black Pyramids, not only because of the color of the stone or their geography, but because they symbolize the presence of a Black African civilization connected to the sacred, which erected monuments for its kings, priests, and ancestors. When visiting the archaeological site of Meroë, for example, you find lines of pyramids still intact, some with internal inscriptions, others with tombs that reveal funerary techniques as sophisticated as those of the Egyptians. And all of this is often ignored, forgotten, or hidden by those who control museums and academia. And it doesn't stop there. In Napata, which was the capital of the Kingdom of Kush for much of the 25th dynasty, temples dedicated to Amun and other gods have been discovered, with immense columns, altars, and inscriptions on stone blocks that have withstood the test of time. These temples show that the Kushites not only had a solid religious structure, but also directly influenced the architecture and pantheon of Egypt itself. The deity Amun, worshipped with such intensity in Egypt, was already revered in the south, among the Kushites, before arriving in force in the north. This shows us that the spiritual route was not from Egypt to Kush, as some have suggested, but from Kush to Egypt. Now, let's talk about Meroitic writing, one of the most intriguing pieces of evidence of the intellectual sophistication of this people. This script, which has not yet been completely deciphered, appears on various monuments, tombs, and artifacts found in Meroë and other cities of the ancient kingdom. It is a language of its own, with unique symbols, showing that the Kushite people developed their own system of written communication, independent of the Egyptians. This is extremely important because it teaches us that they were not just copying, but creating. And creating a script is a sign of advanced civilization, of memory, of recorded spirituality, of a living culture. The artifacts found in these regions confirm this grandeur. Bronze tools, gold jewelry, richly decorated ceramics, decorated swords, statues of local gods, liturgical objects, and even traces of trade with other parts of Africa and the East have been discovered. All this shows that Kush was a center of spirituality, science, wealth, and international connection. They were not isolated. They were leaders. They received and sent. They produced knowledge. In Kerma, considered one of the oldest cities in the Kingdom of Kush, excavations have revealed a sophisticated urban structure, with organized houses, worship areas, a royal palace, and a large central temple. The number of tombs found there indicates the existence of a well-defined priestly and royal class, something that completely contradicts the narrative that the Kushites were merely southern nomads or barbarian warriors. They had a very well-established social, political, and spiritual system. And you know what's even more interesting? These black pyramids of Meroë, for example, are aligned with the stars, with the sun, with the cycles of nature. This shows that they didn't just build them to bury kings, but to mark time, to connect with the universe. The relationship between heaven and earth was something sacred to them. They knew that their ancestors were not dead, but in another dimension. This is something that only a profoundly spiritual, advanced, and conscious civilization can develop. Even with all this physical evidence, these sacred places remain off the beaten tourist track, ignored by major universities, and underexplored by scholars. It's as if there's a silent decision to keep the Kingdom of Kush hidden, even as the desert sand insists on revealing its secrets. Now you understand why it's so important for us to talk about this. Because the stones are speaking, the tombs are speaking, the forgotten writing is crying out for attention. And when we put all this archaeological evidence side by side with biblical texts, oral tradition, and the spiritual history of Africa, it becomes impossible to deny. Kush existed, and its grandeur was real. And if you stop to think about it, all of this changes a lot. Because we're no longer talking about theories. We're talking about temples you can touch, pyramids that are still standing, inscriptions that have withstood the test of time, artifacts that tell silent stories. Stories that were waiting for you, waiting for your awakening. So now, with everything you've heard, answer me in the comments. The stones of Kush still speak, or I recognize the writing of my ancestors. Write this if you feel that something inside you has been activated. Because this content is not just historical, it's spiritual. And if you're here until now, it's because you're part of this calling. If the stones of Kush still speak, as we said at the end of the last segment, what do they say about the kings and priests who built them? What do they reveal about the spirituality of a people who built not only with their hands, but with their souls? Now, we're going to delve into one of the most forgotten and, at the same time, most powerful parts of Kush's history. Its spiritual royalty. Because what few know, or prefer to ignore, is that at the center of the Kingdom of Kush was not just a throne, it was an altar, a direct connection between political power and the sacred, a throne that was occupied by god-kings, warrior priests, and also by sovereign women known as Candaces, whose presence in history still challenges the standards of the modern world. The political structure of Kush was ahead of its time. Kushite kings were not merely rulers in the military or administrative sense. They were seen as spiritual figures, intermediaries between heaven and earth, between ancestors and the people, between the visible and the invisible. Their reigns were marked by sacred rituals, oracular consultations, spiritual blessings, and alliances with the priests of Amun, who formed the religious foundation of the empire. There was no separation between the throne and the temple. To reign in Kush was, above all, a spiritual mission. Among the most impressive figures in Kushite history are the Candaces, queen mothers, warrior queens, priestess queens, women who led armies, made political decisions, presided over sacred rituals, and even appeared in Roman records as the terror of the northern emperors. The word Candace is not a proper name, but a royal title, like pharaoh, used by a lineage of women who carried the weight of spiritual leadership over an entire people. They were respected not only for their power, but for their ancestral wisdom and connection to the gods. It is impressive to realize that, at a time when other cultures barely recognized the role of women in society, Kush was already consecrating women to the throne, arming them for battles, and enshrining their names in royal inscriptions. This balance between the feminine and the masculine in power is a clear reflection of the Kushite spiritual vision, where forces were in harmony and leadership was seen as an extension of the spiritual world. The Candaces represented the force of life, intuition, maternal protection, and their role transcended the boundaries of the physical. It was sacred. But to understand Kushite religion, we need to look at the central figure of their faith, Amun. Yes, the same god worshipped in Egypt, especially in Thebes. But here's the detail that most people ignore. The cult of Amun flourished even more strongly in Kush, where he was not just one among many gods. He was the supreme manifestation of the invisible, of creative power, of the divine breath that sustains cosmic order. In Napata, a monumental temple was built in honor of Amun, where kings and priests consecrated themselves. They sought direct guidance from the god before making decisions, marching to war, or assuming the throne. The worship of Amun in Kush had a much more spiritual and communal character than the ostentation seen in Egypt. It wasn't just about building majestic temples, but about cultivating a living presence. The rituals were profound, marked by dances, songs, fasts, and symbolic sacrifices. It was a faith that connected the people to the land, the river, the sky, and the ancestors. It was a spirituality lived with body and soul. And the Kushite priests were not simply religious figures in robes. They were warriors, strategists, men and women of wisdom, who spiritually guided the people and protected the territory with sword and prayer. They were masters of the visible and the invisible. Many of them lived in temples in the mountains, such as in Jebel Barkal, considered by the Kushites to be a sacred place, the dwelling place of the gods, a point of revelation. The spiritual energy of the mountain was felt, revered, and from there, divine orders emanated to the throne. Kushite religion, unlike institutionalized Western theology, was not separate from daily life. The spiritual was the foundation of politics, agriculture, war, and justice. The harvest was consecrated. Battles were preceded by oracles. Trials were overseen by priests. Dreams had prophetic value. This is much more than a civilization. It is a culture connected to the sacred on every level. And perhaps that's why it was also carefully erased, because showing the world that a black African civilization was structured not only with military force, but with a profound spiritual foundation, with female leadership, with cosmic balance, dismantles the entire image constructed by colonialism, an image that attempts to associate black people with savagery, lack of faith, and inferiority. Kush is the antithesis of that lie. The spiritual legacy of Kush is still among us. It is in the Afro-diasporic religions. It is in the dances, the rituals, the names, the songs. It is in the blood of every descendant who carries the strength of a people who did not bow down, who did not surrender, who were forgotten only by those who lost their connection with the sacred. What Kush teaches us is that black spirituality is not imported. It is original. It is born in the land, in the heart, in the spirit. And that is why it does not die. Now tell me in the comments, I honor the spiritual royalty of my ancestors, or the Candaces live within me. If this part of the story ignited something in you, if you felt the presence of this truth resonating in your spirit, leave your comment below. This isn't just about engagement, it's an act of resistance, of memory, of identity. And if everything we've seen so far seems powerful, what's to come is simply historic, literally. Because we've arrived at one of the boldest, most uncomfortable moments for the system that controls the official narrative, and at the same time most inspiring for everyone with African blood running through their veins. The moment when the Kingdom of Kush not only influenced Egypt, but dominated it. Yes, the Kushites ruled the Egyptian throne. They became the pharaohs themselves, and not for a short period, but for almost a century of firm, structured, and profoundly spiritual reign. We are talking about the 25th pharaonic dynasty, known today, though uncomfortably for some, as the dynasty of the Black Pharaohs. And here an important aside is in order. This term, Black Pharaohs, is not original to ancient times. It was coined by modern historiography, especially Western historiography, and carries with it an almost pejorative tone, as if the presence of black rulers in Egypt were an exception or an anomaly. But the truth is that the presence of black kings in Egypt was not an external invasion. It was a return, a realignment of the ancestral lineage of the Nile, a spiritual and legitimate reclaiming of the throne. This dynasty began with Paye, also known as Pianki, a king of Kush who conquered Egypt not through brutal violence, but through a combination of strategy, faith, and spiritual authority. According to records, Paye invaded northern Egypt not only to expand his territory, but because he believed the Egyptians had strayed from Ma'at, the cosmic principle of truth, balance, and justice. His mission was to restore Egypt's spiritual order, to reclaim the original purpose of pharaonic kingship. He didn't just want to rule, he wanted to purify. And this is where the narrative becomes even more revealing. Egyptian texts, when they speak of Paye, record his devotion. There are inscriptions showing him praying, offering sacrifices to Amun, consulting oracles, respecting temples and priests. He was not a barbarian. He was an initiate. He was someone who understood the spiritual structure of Egypt because his lineage was already part of it. And before Egypt flourished as an empire, he simply reconnected what was broken. After Paye, other Kushite pharaohs followed: Shabaka, Shebitku, Taharka, Tantamani, each with their own mission, each with their own strength. And what is most impressive is that these black pharaohs ruled during an extremely turbulent period when Egypt was weakened, divided by local rulers, marked by spiritual corruption and political instability. And it was precisely the kings of Kush who brought stability, who centralized power, who rebuilt temples, who restored rituals, who reinforced the worship of Amun. In other words, they brought back the sacred. Pharaoh Taharka, in particular, deserves special mention. He is one of the most remembered of this lineage, and even appears in biblical records, such as in the book of 2 Kings and Isaiah. He was known as an imposing warrior, but also as a just, devout, and spiritual ruler. During his reign, he faced threats from the Assyrian Empire and defended Egypt with courage and faith. He built temples, fortified cities, and was one of the most active pharaohs in preserving the spiritual tradition of the Nile. But here's a delicate point. Later Egyptian texts, especially after the fall of the 25th dynasty and with the rise of dynasties influenced by the Greeks and Romans, began to erase or minimize this period. There are gaps, omissions, and distortions. Many temples built or restored by the Kushite pharaohs were attributed to other kings. Statues were destroyed, names were erased from royal lists. This shows that, once again, history was written by the victors, or rather, by those who came after. And the reason for this is clear. The presence of a black dynasty ruling Egypt was unsettling. It was unsettling in the past, and it still is today, because it exposes that the Egyptian supremacy so celebrated by Western academia was neither white, nor isolated, nor original. It was sustained, in one of its most critical moments, by a deep African spiritual lineage, by kings and queens who came from the south, from Kush, carrying wisdom, faith, and ancestry. The surviving records are sufficient for us to reconstruct part of this truth. Many of them are in temples in Karnak, Napata, and Meroë, inscriptions that show Kushite kings offering to the gods, restoring temples, declaring their divine mission to protect Ma'at. More honest archaeologists can no longer deny the importance of this dynasty. But curiously, it is still marginalized in textbooks, documentaries, and popular narratives. You have probably never seen a film showing Pa or Taharqa as heroes. And do you know why? Because placing a black man as the protagonist of Egypt's spiritual history deconstructs centuries of symbolic domination. This part of history forces us to change our perspective. It forces us to recognize that the Kingdom of Kush was not a supporting player. It was a protagonist. That Black Africa not only built civilizations, but saved civilizations. And that the spirituality of our ancestors was not primitive. It was sophisticated, refined, sacred. And now that you know this, tell me in the comments, I recognize the Black pharaohs as my ancestors, or the 25th dynasty represents me. Comment if this truth has resonated with you. After everything we've been through so far, all the truths recovered, the forgotten kings, the ignored pyramids, the silenced sovereign women, the misinterpreted scriptures, now is the time to do something that is perhaps even more important than learning, to reflect. Because this history, the history of Kush, is not just something that happened. It is something that is still happening within us. And the question that needs to echo in your spirit now is, why did they hide this? Why did they silence such a profound, transformative truth? Let's think about this together. Why has Africa, which gave the world its first civilizations, its first forms of structured spirituality, its first writing systems, astronomy, and medicine, been reduced for centuries to a stereotype of pain, misery, and savagery? Who benefits from this? What kind of system needs the image of Africa to be distorted, forgotten, erased? And even more profoundly, why is it so dangerous for Black people to know their true origins? The answer lies precisely in the impact this knowledge has. Because historical awareness generates spiritual power. When you understand that your ancestors didn't begin on slave ships, but rather on thrones, in temples, in sanctuaries on the banks of the Nile. When you discover that your people weren't worshippers of pagan idols, but of deities who represented order, truth, justice, and cosmic connection. When you realize that your identity was stolen so that your soul could be controlled, something breaks, and something is rebuilt. For a long time, Black people were taught that they had no past, that they were a product of slavery, poverty, and backwardness, that their spirituality was superstition, that their culture was folklore. But all of that falls apart when you look at Kush, when you see the strength of the people who built pyramids, who defied empires, who sat on thrones while conducting sacred rituals. The image of Africa as a place of absence was a lie constructed with strategy, politics, distorted theology, and manipulated education. And this lie wasn't just told out there, it was implanted within us. They made us ashamed of our hair, our skin, our name, the sound of the drum, the dance of the body, the tear in prayer. They disconnected us from our ancestral spirituality. They replaced the drum with the bell, the candle with neon, the oracle with confession, ancestry with guilt. And in doing so, they broke the bridge between who we are and who we came to be. But now that we know, what changes? Everything. Because knowledge can no longer be taken away. Once your eyes are opened, they never close again. Your posture changes. The way you pray changes. The way you look at yourself in the mirror changes. Because it's no longer just about appearance, it's about consciousness. It's no longer just about history, it's about spirit. It's no longer about where we came from, but about who we still are. And here is the key point of this reflection. Kush was never just a place. Kush is a spiritual memory, an ancestral calling that echoes in the blood. It is the reminder that we were once kings, we were once priests, we were once divine. Not in the sense of arrogance, but in the sense of mission. We were placed in this world to represent order, to restore balance, to keep the connection with the invisible alive. This is the mission that the erasure tried to destroy, and this is the mission that we are now beginning to restore. Because when you reconnect with Kush, you reconnect with yourself. You stop being just someone trying to survive and begin to be someone who carries a legacy. You understand that your faith didn't begin in a Gothic cathedral, but perhaps in a temple erected by the river, where men and women bathed with herbs, raised their arms to the sky, and declared that earth and spirit were one. And that changes everything. It changes how we educate our children. It changes how we organize ourselves as a community. It changes what we prioritize, what we consume, what we build. Because without identity, any structure crumbles. But with identity, even ruins become temples. And here's a profound invitation. How about starting to rebuild your inner temple with the bricks of ancestral truth? How about clearing away the rubble of shame, ignorance, and guilt that you've been taught to carry, and replacing it with the awareness of the royalty that belongs to you by lineage and spiritual right? The truth that shows you that you were never an orphan, that you were never a slave in spirit, that your history was kidnapped, but your essence survived. And if all of this resonated with you, I really want to hear your voice. Comment below, "My identity begins in Kush," or "The truth reconnected me with my ancestry." If you've made it this far, it's because this content touched you. And your comment isn't just engagement, it's an act of remembrance. It's a cry of affirmation. It's a reverence for your ancestors. If you've made it this far, it's because this truth spoke to you in some way. And I want to congratulate you for that, because not everyone stays until the end of a video like this. It's those who are seeking something greater. It's those who feel the need to reconnect with their roots, with their history, with their spirituality. So if this message resonated with you, leave a like now, because that helps this content reach more people who also need to awaken. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because here we'll continue unearthing hidden truths, revealing forgotten stories, and highlighting the value of our people. And do yourself and this community a favor. Comment below with the phrase, "I am the awakening of Kush." This comment is more than engagement. It's a seal of approval. It's a commitment to this reconnection. And before you leave, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen. It's the natural continuation of this journey. You've already taken the first step. Now it's time to follow it to the end. See you there.